Residents have been forced to take desperate measures to bring some light into their lives. Helmar Zango is a lighting expert who specializes in bringing natural light into some of the world's biggest buildings. He may be the salvation of Rattenberg.
Evolutionary speaking, man has adapted to natural light and has adapted to the sun. And if we deprive man of the sun, clearly it's a different quality of life. How do you feel if you sit for 1 week in a place with fog? And how do you feel when you sit for 1 day in a place where the sun shines? I personally feel so much happier in sunshine, I can tell you that.
The solution for Rattenberg is simple. Steal some of the sunlight from the other side of the valley. Eventually, a huge system of mirrors will reflect the light of the sun to a second set of mirrors on the castle above the town, and then reflect it down into the streets to brighten the lives of the citizens of Rattenberg.
The main effect for the people in town will be that part of the facades of the buildings and parts of the street, at least of the main street, will be brightly illuminated and will clearly be recognized as sunlight.
It sounds crazy, but it's true. People will go to extraordinary lengths for a bit of sunlight. But the sun is much more than a giant light bulb. There are other forces at work in the sun. Forces that change over minutes and over years. Forces that tear the surface apart. We are only now beginning to understand these forces and the effects they have on the Earth. But we've known about them for hundreds of years, because the sun gets spots.
Sunspots are dark regions on the surface of the sun, typically about the size of the Earth in terms of area. Here's a live shot of one today. Unfortunately, we've got a very windy day with high thin clouds. The picture is bouncing around and not very sharp. But with very high resolution images, we can see detailed structure in the sunspot. The inner part of the sunspot, the dark umbra as we call it, is dark only in comparison to the rest of the sun. It's actually bright enough that it would blind you if you looked at it alone.
The spots are not static. These video images show the edges crawling, almost as if it was alive. The movements of sunspots have been studied for 400 years, ever since Galileo trained his telescope on the sun and made the first crucial discovery about its behavior. Surprised to see black dots creeping over the surface, he kept track of them over a number of days and found that they were all moving in the same direction. To Galileo, the meaning was clear. The sun was rotating and was turning faster at the equator than at the poles. It was a discovery that was to prove critical in our understanding of how the sun works. Ever since Galileo, records have been kept of the coming and goings of sunspots, and variations soon became clear. Sometimes the sun is covered in hundreds of spots. Other times there are none at all. And after a while, a pattern emerged.
If you observe sunspots over several years, they come and go with about an 11-year cycle. from solar minimum, where there can be no spots at all on the sun for weeks or months at a time, to a maximum where you can have 100 spots visible on the surface of the sun, and then a decline again, usually over about 6 years or so, to back to minimum.
Until recently, no one knew what was driving the solar cycle, or where sunspots came from. But people had always suspected that the scars on the sun's surface had an effect on the Earth, but no one could quite put their finger on what it was.
It has been correlated with all kinds of different things. The price of wheat, the thickness of fur on animals. I'm inundated with it every day. I get a guy that comes to my website to try to predict the stock market from the daily sunspot areas. And he's like, oh, you didn't post them today. I gotta know. So you making money or what? I want some if you are.
One effect sunspots do have on the Earth is on the climate. But it is a subtle effect. Its greatest impact was only noticed 300 years after the event. It was discovered in Greenwich by the astronomer Robert Maunder, who was studying the hundreds of years of sunspot records held at the Royal Observatory.
And in the late part of the 19th century, he became particularly interested in the sunspots. He discovered that there had been this peculiar effect in the second half of the 17th and the 18th centuries when the sunspot numbers diminished to really a fraction of what they are today. And he described this as the Maunder minimum.
For 70 years, from 1645 to 1715, sunspots disappeared. It was as if the engine that drives the solar cycle had stopped. And it correlated almost exactly with the last period of prolonged cold to strike the northern hemisphere. They call it the Little Ice Age.
What's interesting about a period like the Little Ice Age is that you don't necessarily see a very large dip in temperatures, but nonetheless, even a degree or two is enough to see some really quite dramatic effects, like pack ice advancing south from the North Pole, like the Viking colonies in Greenland being wiped out by the change in climate, and the population of Iceland falling by a half. Now in Britain, the weather was cold enough that the Thames would regularly freeze in winter, and one of the classic depictions of life at the time is frost fairs, when the population would hold a fair on the frozen river. So things really must have been a lot harsher than they are today.
When the sunspots disappeared, something on the sun changed that cooled the Earth down. But it wasn't that the solar output changed. No matter how many sunspots there are, the sun doesn't get any hotter or brighter. So the spots must have another effect. And to see it, we need a different way to look at the sun. It's not just heat and light that the sun is throwing at the Earth. As every sunbather knows, there's ultraviolet light too. Enough UV reaches the surface to burn our skin, but it is only a fraction of the sun's UV output. The rest is filtered out by the atmosphere. It means we don't get a complete picture of the sun from the Earth. To see it in all its glory, you have to go into space. From here, you can really see the changing sun. In the extreme UV, the sunspots burn a brilliant white.